Demandred, how far is this one?
That's pretty good.
That's hard. Woo! Ow.
This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Your hosts are Seth Jacobson and Patrick Hyler.
Hi, I'm Seth.
And I'm Patrick.
I enjoyed, honestly, looking at the Lord of Chaos, the little prophecy in the beginning. I was like, okay, yeah. But then I heard in Great Arvalin, which I guess...
Isn't that the Fourth Age?
And it's the Fourth Age, after the last battle. So Tarvalin must have become Great Arvalin.
The way words change over time. Arvalon.
Which,
Avalon?
yes, Avalon. I noticed that connection as well with the respelling. Sort of the way you have Amerlin, Tamerlin.
Mm-hmm. Hidden City in Mist.
Tarvalin, Arvalin. I have to wonder if there's some connection as well with Ongrial, Terangrial? Who knows? He just likes to put T's at the beginning of his things.
The Demandred Prologue, guys, is awesome. It's like 5 pages. I didn't know where to cut this. I didn't know how to cut this.
If I'll be honest, this 2-3 page bit on Demandred is why so many people spent so long trying to figure out, like, where the fuck is Demandred and what is he up to? And why the whole Shara thing was such a shock. Like, everyone was trying to, like, was he tame? Was he, like, in the borderlands? There was all sorts of speculation. And I think he really became an interesting, the Demandred theory.
Demandred. I was a believer for a long time.
I was, too. And I think, as we read, it was...
This tame guy, something weird is happening there. It's probably one of the Forsaken.
And Charmy, at this point, I do believe that Jordan had changed his mind. I don't think at this point. Just because there was a...
That is part of the lore, right? That maybe at some point...
It's in the notes.
Okay.
That at some point early on, Jordan was thinking about making Tame Demandred. But we don't know exactly at what point he changed his mind and separated them.
Who raises Tame? Isn't it...
Demandred.
It's Demandred?
Who... What do you mean raises him?
Makes him a Hail, or not, makes him a Chosen.
I mean, that's just the Dark One, I think, does that. Although Demandred is the one who sponsors him.
That's a good description. That's a good way to describe it, I think. Because I don't think you can get in that room unless, like, somebody's bringing you in, you know? But all that being said, I will go ahead and read this, and we'll do our normal thing.
Do you want to read the prophecy in the beginning first?
Oh, yes. This book is already falling apart.
Oh, good God.
I know.
It's not going to last.
That's what I get for buying used books.
Can I just say, before we start anything,
yeah,
that we are coming up almost exactly on 3 years since we started. We're about 9 days
1 week away. Yeah.
Yeah, 1 week away from 3 years. We're about to start book 6 of this series. We have thousands of listeners.
Wow, this is book 6 already, isn't it? Holy shit.
Right? We are 1/3 of the way done. I still am like, we're just 2 nerds in a basement talking about the Wheel of Time. I constantly forget how big this thing has gotten until I, like, deliberately look up and see it.
We did evolve into something pretty big. I mean, you know, and I have no idea what the future holds. I have no idea at all. Well, with everything happening in the world right now, but, you know, I want to go all the way through. I want to finish.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of have to. Like, not that we kind of have to, but, like, I want to.
For me, it's even like, when we first started, you know, I was like, maybe no one will listen to this, but I think someone should do it. Someone ought to do this, and this is a cool exercise. And so I was like, yeah, let's do it. And it can just be, you know, me and my friend get together on Thursday nights and have some beers and you know, we have a little book club that's just the 2 of us. And that was the in the beginning, I was like, well, that's no loss. That's a enriching thing to anyone's
That was the
life,
genesis,
you know?
yeah.
Yeah. And then, as it turned out, people do actually really care about this a lot. that, I think we've tried to do other spoiler podcasts with different books, like Mistborn and stuff, that just never got the same traction. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have done it, but I think that, based on my own observations anyway, the Wheel of Time has become a religion for people, like it did for me, or that's the best way I can describe it, more than any other fiction that I can think of.
It's something special.
I can think of some fictions that have more followers, but I'm not going to go there.
Yeah, but no one's as crazy as we are.
I wouldn't go that far either. Wheel of Time fans are generally pretty, measured, okay people. They're like... realize that they're an unreliable narrator, and
Yes, but what I will say though about Wheel of Time people is they, more than anyone else, model their actual life after the philosophy in Wheel of Time. I see Wheel of Time readers as the most empathetic group of people who treat each other well, and I see other fandoms who wear more merch because there's more obvious merch because it's been on TV. I see fandoms that talk about it more in day-to-day life. I see fans that have different measures of fandom. But people who love Wheel of Time love it to their core and live it in a way that and the reread is real. The constant rereading of the series and living within that world and sort of taking yourself there. It's one of those things that I don't know how to explain it, but I think Wheel of Time fans it's some of the deepest of all the fandoms that I've ever seen.
Something special happened. Anyway, I should probably start reading before I drink too much of this rice wine.
I am a Starburst IPA from Ecliptic.
I would tell you guys the name of my sake, but I can't pronounce it. I'll take a picture later. I could try. I'd have to go get the bottle. It's in the fridge right now. I'm going to read for now. I finished my glass. When I finish this long read, maybe we'll do a little more and I'll have another drink. But I don't want my tongue to get too loose before we begin. The prologue to the prologue of Lord of Chaos. The lions sing, and the hills take flight. The moon by day, the sun by night. Blind woman, deaf man, jackdaw fool. Let the Lord of Chaos rule. Chant from a children's game, heard in Great Arvalon, the Fourth Age.
And I think I commented on Great Arvalon must be the new name for Tarvalon.
Yeah.
And also a synonym for Avalon.
The first time I picked up the book and saw Tarvalon, I was like, oh, Avalon.
Yeah.
Immediately.
I remember Avalon was, I think that book had come out about the same time. My mom was reading Avalon, and I tried to pick that up, and I never found it particularly interesting. But I remember seeing that book and being like, oh, like Tarvalon? Because Tarvalon was in my head first, so, yeah.
Oh, not me. I'd read, I feel like, most of the traditional fantasy before I started Wheel of Time.
Wheel of Time was so early on in my, I don't know, maybe it just dominates it.
But Wheel of Time was something I found accidentally, and that's, I think, most people's story. Well, either that or a suggestion from a friend. I had really low standards at the time. I remember I was reading voraciously. I go through phases, and I picked up the book off a bookshelf in Barnes & Noble. I was literally just walking down the shelf until I saw something that popped out at me, that spoke to me. I grabbed it, picked it up, and I was like, crummy cover. Opened it.
Yeah, it's a shitty cover.
Read the first couple of pages, and I was like, oh, I read the first few chapters of this when I was a kid, but I couldn't handle it then. So I was like, all right, there's my book for this week.
Nice.
And I just walked out. And
did you buy the book?
Oh, yes, I did.
Okay. I don't know. I feel like I just walked out with the book.
Right. I didn't include that part.
Yeah, that would be a great story of like, yeah, I stole my first copy of Eye of the World, it turns out.
It's the most punk rock Watt podcast.
You bad boy stealing books. Oh, I was reading a lot of Piers Anthony, not because it was good, but because I could get the novels for 50 cents each in the used bookstore, and there were tons of them. So I was just reading a ton of like Xanth and all of his old sci-fi. All that stuff was like...
I told you about this too. My American grandpa collected novels like that, and he had like milk crates full of them. He had like a shed in his backyard just full of pulp novels. Bought, sold, collected, traded, and he was super into this like old veteran, what do you call it, flea market scene.
Okay.
So he would show up to these things, and he like knew all the guys. I used to go with him in the summertime when I was a little boy, and he would like do deals, like trade this stack of books for that stack of books and whatever, and sell some stuff to the general public. He would let me and my cousin Trisha, I'm Patrick and she's Patricia, yes, that's real, and we were allowed to pick any book out of the crate, and then we had to bring it to him for approval. So I do specifically remember that he let me read Wheel of the Time, but not, or he let me pick Wheel of Time, but not any
Wheel
Stephen
of the
King
Time?
novel. Yes, I said Wheel of the Time, the Wheel of Time. He wouldn't let me read. I think it was The Stand that I also picked. He was like, "Nah, you can read this one though, about knights or something." Okay.
My parents never monitored my book reading because they didn't know. They were just like, "Oh, you want a book? Sure." Like
He did. My other grandfather did not.
I read Clan of the Cave Bear at a very young age. Clan of the Cave Bear is not a book you should give to a young child. There's some brutal rape scenes in there. Yeah, and just like all the Piers Anthony stuff was just perverted as hell.
Oh yes, that's what made me think of that. That's I read a lot of Piers Anthony, and it was a lot of hypersexualized elves and satyrs and weird stuff like that.
And demons, yeah, totally. Non-human things that he would then treat as sexual objects, but they were still women, and so, yeah.
I didn't know anything. I was like 11.
Yeah, but I thought it was cool. I was like, great, women are
this
objects,
is nuts.
Wonderful. Yeah.
I'm an adult or something. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'm really going to read now.
Wait, before you do.
Mm-hmm. And just in case I haven't said so yet, this is the prologue of Lord of Chaos. Its title is The First Message, and its symbol is the snake in the wheel. Demandred stepped out onto the black slopes of Shayol Ghul, and the gateway, a hole in reality's fabric, winked out of existence. Above, roiling gray clouds hid the sky, an inverted sea of sluggish, ashen waves crashing around the mountain's hidden peak. Below, odd lights flashed across the barren valley, washed-out blues and reds, failing to dispel the dusky murk that shrouded their source. Lightning streaked up at the clouds, and slow thunder rolled. Across the slope, steam and smoke rose from scattered vents, some holes as small as a man's hand, and some large enough to swallow 10 men. He released the one power immediately, and with the vanished sweetness went the heightened senses that made everything sharper, clearer. The absence of Saidin left him hollow, yet here only a fool would even appear ready to channel. Besides, here only a fool would want to see or smell or feel too clearly. In what was now called the Age of Legends, this had been an idyllic island in a cool sea, a favorite of those who enjoyed the rustic. Despite the steam, it was bitter cold now. He did not allow himself to feel it, but instinct made him pull his fur-lined velvet cloak closer. Feathery mist marked his breath, clearly visible, before the air drank it. A few hundred leagues north, the world was pure ice, but Thakandar was always dry as any desert, though always wrapped in winter. There was water of a sort, an inky rivulet, oozing down the side of a rocky slope beside a great-roofed forge. Hammers rang inside, and with every ring, white light flared in the cramped windows. A ragged woman crouched in a hopeless heap against the forge's rough stone wall, clutching a babe in her arms, and a spindly girl buried her face in the women's skirts. Prisoners from a raid down into the borderlands, no doubt, but so few. The Myrddraal must be gnashing their teeth. Their blades failed after a time, and had to be replaced, no matter that raids into the borderlands had been curtailed. One of the forgers emerged, a thick, slow-moving man-shape that seemed hacked out of the mountain. The forgers were not truly alive. Carried any distance from Shayol Ghul, they turned to stone or dust. Nor were they smiths as such. They made nothing but the swords. This one's 2 hands held a sword blade in long tongs, a blade already quenched, pale like moonlit snow. Alive or not, The forger took care as it dipped the gleaming metal into the dark stream. Whatever semblance of life it had could be ended by the touch of that water. When the metal came out again, it was dead black, but the making was not done yet. The forger shuffled back inside, and suddenly a man's voice raised a desperate shout. "No, no, no!" He shrieked then, the sound dwindling away without losing intensity, as though the screamer had been yanked into unimaginably far distance. Now the blade was done. Once more a forger appeared, perhaps the same, perhaps another, and hauled the woman to her feet. Woman, babe, and child began to wail, but the infant was pulled away and shoved into the girl's arms. At least the woman found a scrap of resistance. Weeping, she kicked wildly, clawed at the forger. It paid no more mind than a stone would have. The woman's cries vanished as soon as she was inside. The hammers began ringing again, drowning the sobs of the children. One blade made, one making, and 2 to come. Demandred had never before seen fewer than 50 prisoners waiting to give their might to the great Lord of the Dark. The Myrddraal must be gnashing their teeth indeed. Should I, yell to be the Dark One? I'll just enunciate a bunch, I guess. Demandred. Demandred.
Mostly what I want to point out is just how much Shaidar Haran is not a normal Fade. He is the avatar of the Dark One himself, the Great Lord. And he is what ends up birthing the darkness that Rand fights. Shaidar Haran, as far as we can tell, is the avatar of the Dark One. And we've seen him a couple of times before. We've seen him as the Fade that smiles, the Fade that's a little taller. He's had a few other interactions, but now we're seeing that with the breakage of the last seal, which we saw at the end of Fires of Heaven, all of a sudden Shaidar Haran is taller than he used to be.
It does make sense. Just that almost literally the Dark One's presence in the world is larger. This is a way to kind of demonstrate it, you know?
I also noticed that the sky that was not the sky of Thakandar. So when you look up, you see the sky that's a bunch of streaks, which reminds me a lot of the portal world that Rand was in, or was it a dream? The one where he looks down and it's a bunch of streaks, and there's streaks in the sky. In the portal world, he looked up and there was a bunch of clouds streaking through the sky.
I believe that's right, yeah.
And so this description reminds me a lot of that portal world.
Oh.
Just a thought. That world may have been in some ways closer to the Dark One.
Well, that makes a lot of sense to me. We also know that the portal world that Rand was in, and we're talking about with Selene and...
Yep.
Yeah. The portal world that Rand was in was a was a very unlikely future, you know?
It was faint.
Yeah, so it's kind of...
But it was one that Lanfear chose to send them to.
Yes, it was kind of far away from possibility, and I also view the Dark One as he's also far away from the pattern, from what the real pattern is doing. And by the real pattern, I mean the most likely possibilities. So we have to also assume that, the Wheel of Time went very much as it did, but, maybe Rand died. Or any number of different things could have happened. And they could be, one small difference. Maybe Matt blew off his hand in tear that first time he handled fireworks. Why not? It could be very small differences that may not really change very much. They're different. It's a different reality. It's a reality outside of this one,
Steph is asking if the Forgers only make swords for the Myrddraal, and the Trollocs just get theirs wherever, or... I think the Forgers do. They make special Myrddraal swords, and I think there are just regular smiths, probably Trolloc smiths, that make their swords.
That's a good question, actually.
Who armors the Trollocs?
We don't know much about the Forgers, and, all we really do know about them is that they're constructs, they're not alive, they're literally made out of stone, they can only survive near the Dark One, or near Shayol Ghul.
Well, I would assume they were made by Agenor using the true power.
Probably. And they can only make these swords.
Yeah.
That's all they can do. And that's what Demandred tells us, anyway.
Oh, Hopper Lives is pointing out that the Trolloc that stabbed Tame had a Thakandar forged sword. That's why he got the infection. Good point, Hopper Lives.
Yeah, and now that I'm thinking about it, isn't it something a little closer to that half-men always have the blade, but sometimes a cut from a Trollocs blade can do it too? Like that it's just not as good. But
yeah, maybe they get the when a Myrddraal's like, I want a new blade. Here, you're a
you
Trolloc.
can have the old garbage.
You can have the old garbage, yeah. Even though it's still, because it's power forged, basically, it's still a good blade.
I'm glad you pointed that out, Hopper Lives. Hope you're doing well, by the way.
I love the fact that when we go through this, there's people here live who are usually at various points in reading the books, and oftentimes someone will come up with a point and it'll be like, how did you remember that? And it's like, oh, I read it yesterday. And I think that's great. It's great because we have this wide experience of people constantly rereading the books and constantly discovering things, and constantly correcting us, which is super important.
Need that. But yeah, I forgot that Tam and Rand never were really confronted by that particular Myrddraal, which sometimes some people think might be Shaidar Haran before all of that happens. But
I don't think, not the one in the Two Rivers. We do see Shaidar Haran, I believe, talking to...
It's one of the wagon drivers that Rand and Matt are riding with or something. And I remember this. And then the other wagon driver, the old, nice kind of gruff farmer, says like, hey, I don't know what that guy and that other weird guy who won't show his face over there are talking about, or like, I don't know exactly what they're planning, but it's about you, so you all should probably jump in the back of my wagon right now.
I don't think that fade is Shaidar Haran yet.
Is that the one that smiles?
No, because the one that smiles is the one who meets with Steph has got Jacob Carradine.
Skane?
He meets with Skane later.
Oh, yes.
But this is the one who meets with Jacob Carradine.
That one shows real pleasure in Carradine's discomfort.
Yep. So that's the one I think is Shaidar Haran. That's the first, I believe, instance of seeing him.
What fools they were who opposed the great lord. Oh, the boar was still blocked, though more tenuously than when he had wakened from his long sleep and broken free of his own prison in it. Blocked, but larger than when he woke, still not so large as when he had been cast into it with his fellows at the end of the War of Power, but each visit since waking a little wider. Soon the blockage would be gone, and the great lord would reach out across the earth again. Soon would come the day of return, and he would rule the world for all time, under the great lord, of course, and with those of the other chosen who survived, also, of course. You may leave now, half-man. He did not want the thing here to see the ecstasy overcome him. The ecstasy and the pain. Shaidar Haran did not move. Demandred opened his mouth, and a voice exploded in his head. I don't know. I can't do voices.
Yeah, man. You, how about? do you want me to
just louder doesn't work.
Demandred. Demandred.
That was pretty good.
That's hard. Woo! Ow.
To call it a voice was to call a mountain a pebble. It nearly crushed him against the inside of his own skull. It filled him with rapture. He sank to his knees. The Myrddraal stood watching impassively, but only a small part of him could even notice the thing with that voice filling his brain. Do you want to read the next line? I think I could do something comparable. I could just read this shit.
Demandred, how fares this world?
Wonderful. He was never quite sure how much the great lord knew of the world. He had been as startled by ignorance as by knowledge, but he had no doubt what the great lord wanted to hear. Rahvin is dead, great lord. Yesterday. There was pain. Euphoria too strong became pain quickly. His arms and legs twitched. He was sweating now. Lanfear has vanished without a trace, just as Asmodean did. And Graendal says Moghedien failed to meet her, as they had agreed. Also yesterday, great lord, I do not believe in coincidence. Do you want to try this? This is a lot longer.
There may be some pauses.
Okay.
The chosen dwindle, Demandred. The weak fall away. Who betrays me shall die the final death. Asmodean, twisted by his weakness. Rahvin, dead in his pride. He served well, yet even I cannot save him from balefire. Even I cannot step outside of time.
Nice. For an instant, terrible anger filled that voice. And could it be frustration? An instant only.
Done by my ancient enemy, the one called Dragon. Would you unleash the balefire in my service, Demandred?
Demandred hesitated. A bead of sweat slid half an inch on his cheek. It seemed to take an hour. For a year during the War of Power, both sides had used balefire until they learned the consequences. Without agreement or truce, there had never been a truce any more than there had been quarter. Each side simply stopped. Entire cities died in balefire that year. Hundreds of thousands of threads burned from the pattern. Reality itself almost unraveled. World and universe evaporating like mist. If balefire was unleashed once more, there might be no world to rule. Another point pricked him. The Great Lord already knew how Rahvin had died, and seemed to know more of Asmodean than he. As you command, Great Lord, so shall I obey. His muscles might be jerking, but his voice was rock steady. His knees began to blister from the hot stone, yet the flesh might as well have been someone else's.
So you shall.
Great Lord, the dragon can be destroyed. A dead man could not wield balefire again, and perhaps then the Great Lord would see no need for it. He is ignorant and weak, scattering his attentions in a dozen directions. Rahvin was a vain fool.
Would you be nae bliss?
Demandred's tongue froze. Nae bliss? The one who would stand only a step below the Great Lord, commanding all others. I wish only to serve you, Great Lord, however I may.
Then listen and serve. Hear who will die and who live.
Demandred screamed as the voice crashed home. Tears of joy rolled down his face. Unmoving, the Myrddraal watched him.
That was fun.
I realized I made a tiny error here. I don't know that it matters, but this is actually a little bit weird, because I hesitated, and then you started your line there. I read, the one who would stand only a step below the Great Lord, commanding all others. I wish only to serve you, Great Lord, however I may. Nae bliss. And then the next line starts.
Yeah.
Nae bliss is not in quotes. Is it supposed to be its own thought? Nae bliss by itself.
That's what I'm thinking.
You know?
I think he's just thinking nae bliss in his own head.
I think because it's all on those are the last 4 words on this page, on my page here. It makes it look like there should be an enter there.
Gotcha. Yeah, probably.
I think.
Actually.
Yeah.
I'm going to agree with you there. I think that may be a bit of a typo. Or I don't know, how would you?
Oh, it's not really a typo. It's
No, it's not really a typo.
What do you call that? A syntax error? Like
Yeah.
everything is correct except nobody hit enter there. Somebody just missed a button, you know?
But I'm wondering is maybe it might actually supposed to be on the same line because it's the same person. It's just the difference between what they're saying out loud versus in their own head.
That's what would change it around. That he could be interrupting himself, or he could be.
There's a sandwich. He says nae bliss, and then there's a sentence, and then he says nae bliss again. So he's sort of thinking nae bliss, blah blah blah. Like he's just like repeating, "Oh my God, nae bliss." It's not. There's no italics in my book.
Yeah, no. Yeah, that's what it's supposed to be, because it says, Demandred's tongue froze, period, space, nae bliss, period, space. The one who would stand only a step. Yeah.
He's overcome with. He's like.
He's repeating
oh
the
my
word
God.
to himself.
Yeah.
That makes a lot more sense.
Mm-hmm. It's like someone says, "Do you want to be president?" And you're like, "President." Oh
President?
my God, really?
Wait,
you want me to be president?
President?
President? Yeah, exactly.
That's a dumb idea, man.
Yeah, that's not a good idea. Although, I gotta be honest, at this point, I'd vote for you, Patrick.
I would vote for your dog, Seth. I mean...
Timber would be a fucking amazing president.
Italy almost entered the Triple Alliance, but it did not, because it considered the Central Powers to be too aggressive. They only wanted a defensive alliance, so Italy did not join. And they fought against Austria-Hungary for a while until they got beat. That's my summation of what I just learned.
World War I is such a hard war to study because the battlefront was so long. It was basically spanned the entire continent, and it's like impossible to know like what was happening in it, and it was just all these trenches and like terrible communication and fog of war.
Sure.
And, like, it's so hard to study what happened in World War I or make any sense of it.
I feel like World War II is only easier because of how quickly conflicts moved, so at least you can say, like, the battle at this, the battle at that, but there are still some examples like the battle at Stalingrad, whereas, like, in World War I, the, battle at Marne was, like, it was, like, 3 years long. It included, like, millions of soldiers. Like, and like, hundreds of miles long. So you can say this was the battle for Marne, but that's not really. It's not really a battle when it's 3 years long, is it?
It's the meat grinder for Marne.
Right. That's more accurate.
And what's crazy about it is it's not like they're defending an asset. It's not like it's a siege on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not protecting anything, just this line in the sand that we've decided to draw as people. Ugh, the more I think about it, the more crazy World War I is.
Well, I've have found it to be one of the more fascinating points in history that I read about, because I feel like these people are close to us, but so very far away. These people who wrote, our great-grandparents that we were just talking about. I believe that if I sat down at a table with that man and tried to have a conversation, it would not go well. They're not like us. They grew up in a different world before anyone envisioned things like flight. Or, machines more complex than a wristwatch. That was like top-notch technology at the time.
We live in a post-World War II world.
Yeah.
That's everything from World War II on kind of looks like the life you would be used to.
I'd say even World War I on.
Yeah.
From the end.
I want to say, like, the manufacturing really picked up after World War II. And really, like, you had a washing machine, you had a dishwasher, you had, like,
expanded
kitchen
further,
appliances. Yeah.
I guess I'm so fascinated by World War I and reading its history, because I feel like when you understand or, begin to grasp some of what happened during that era, you start to understand the world as it is today and why it is, why borders are where they are, why cultures are the way they are, why World War II even happened. Like a lot of people always focus on that, but that's not the beginning. I guess you could say it came back further before that, but still.
I always say, World War II is just the second part of, it's the same war. There was just a ceasefire for 2 decades, or a decade, however long you want to.
Yeah, about that.
15 to 35, right?
Super cool, though. Lords with white gloves and white horses that had armor on the horses and shit, breastplates showed up at the beginning of World War I, and at the end we had tanks and planes that dropped bombs, and begin to be a world that we recognized. We have Austria and Hungary, not a giant hodgepodge of alliances through marriage that bonded these states together in the past. Now they're all separate.
And bringing it back to Wheel of Time, I feel like Randland is going through a very similar transition in the books, and they do it in like 2 years, that a lot of the world did during World War II, which is you're going from this cavalry, horses,
and
swords, to high-tech air support, major bombs, huge explosions. You know, channeling in this case replaces technology, but the transition is almost exactly the same. When you're watching when you get to Dumai's Wells and you watch a wall of Aiel run into a meat grinder, I can't help but think of World War I and a line of troops charging at a machine gun nest.
Mm-hmm.
And like you see how well he's transitioned and done the analogy with
charge for honor.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
And that is what I would say if someone told me to charge at a machine gun for armor. Okay. How about you just shoot me now? But those men were different.
That's always the fun choice. Do you say just go ahead and shoot me now? You know?
Yeah. This way I don't die bleeding and screaming on a battlefield over days or something. I'll take the execution.
On that high note.
The real answer is I probably wouldn't, because death or maybe death. I guess I'll probably pick maybe death.
And so I really, actually, I think that is the appropriate note to start this book on, because this is a dark, dark novel.
Yeah, and death or maybe death. Demandred picks maybe death, and so do all the Forsaken. But also, I while we were talking about Austria-Hungary for a second, it made me think a little bit of Andor. And at the end of the section that Seth and I set aside here, because the prologue to Lord of Chaos is like almost 100 pages long or something, 90 some odd, I believe.
60 in my digital book, but I can make the font's pretty small right now. I could increase the font and it would go up to like 200. So
it's 80 in my paperback, but that's the one with the really tiny font. So oh, but the whole point of that was at the end of this section that Seth and I set aside here, Min and Elaine are talking, and Elaine says something about like, oh, you know, this was part of Andor, and Min's like, really? Where I grew up? Like, a lot of people there don't even know that 200 years ago there was some kind of alliance that made that part of the world part of Andor, and so it's no longer relevant.
Still pisses Elaine off, though.
Yeah, well, you know, you should probably send a representative or something. You can't just claim an area of the world and not tell the people there that is a thing, if you want them to know about it anyway. We've talked about this before. I think if some Queensguard showed up in Emmons Field before any of this ever happened and said, this is a part of Andor now and you're going to pay us taxes, I think they would have told him to get the hell out. Probably.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, they would have said, yeah, you come back with, like, help for us before we'll do anything to help you.
Right. You and what army? Go ahead, bring them.
Yeah.
See you in a year or two. Good luck when we burn the bridge down.
Yeah. What bridge? It's a fucking ferry. Well, that's the only way to get to them.
That's true.
Literally. And the White Cloaks have enough trouble getting their army across the ferry.
Wave to you on the other side, and when you conquer us, you're going to have to leave pretty soon. There's not enough room here for you guys.
Listen, you stand over on that side of the field, we'll stand over on this side of the field and shoot bows at each other and see who wins. You can charge. Plan. Go right ahead. Go right ahead.
Charge. The river.
See how well that works for Trollocs.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or
support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?